Have you ever noticed all these really interesting ambient style videos that pop up on YouTube? If you go down that rabbit hole at all, you'll get tons of them suggested to you. And a lot of them refer to this idea of stretched audio, where something is spread out into this amazing ambient soundscape from usually some previous source material that makes the video kind of interesting, why people want to click on it. And I've always wondered, how do you do this? And when I first looked it up, I found a lot of people saying that you could only do this in FL Studio using a specific function, and that is true, but you can do it in any DAW. In fact, you don't even need a DAW to do it. You can do it on a standalone app that's totally free to download called PaulXStretch. PaulXStretch just lets you drag and drop anything into it, and you can use a number of parameters to drastically change the sound. But you can download this as a VST style app, or as a plugin I should say, and just bring it up into your DAW. Here I'm in Ableton, and down here is where you can just drag and drop virtually anything in there. And the main thing is the stretch amount. So I think by default it's at 3, which will make the sound a little more unreal sounding. It'll spread it out a little bit. But if you go sort of past 10 into multiples like that, it's going to get very, very huge. And then you just hit the render button and you can save it as an audio file. And this is probably the big way around how people take these different forms of source material and turn them into these really interesting stretched soundscapes, you could call them, right? And a lot of times if you're looking for material that you want to use, you can go to a lot of playlists on YouTube itself that function around public domain material. And specifically, there's playlists like this one that focus only on things that are entering the public domain as of 2024. So you don't have to run into any copyright issues necessarily. And this one I'm using from a classic by the great Bessie Smith. And when I spread this out, I'm going to get a drastically different sound. Now, what's so interesting about it is that you would never have guessed, if I go back to this recording, that it came from something like this.
He's a deep sea diver with a stroke that can't go wrong.
But I guess because it's stretched out towards this sort of value, you just get really beautiful spreading of those harmonics. And it's really interesting when you do it with different source material like this one in particular, because her voice in particular is going to like soar when you spread it out and stretch it out. But you could do it with anything. You could literally put a sample in here, a loop. You could put a drum loop in here, see what it does to the sound. And there's so many parameters that you can play with, like pitch shift and frequency shift, that are going to give you a ton of different things. What's really crazy about it is that in this different section of the music, there's probably like a diminished chord happening, or a part of the melody where the singer, Bessie's singing like a blue note. And it kind of sounds like an ambient horror soundscape because of that. So it's really, really interesting what this does over different source material. And this is without any effects whatsoever. So once I render this down, I can also do other things to it. So I'm just going to go up here to render and save it somewhere. Probably the only downside to this is there's a little bit of a waiting game as it actually makes the file, but it's quite a large file, so it kind of makes sense you have to wait. Okay, so now let's drag and drop this in. So it's really interesting how this thing reacts. I could just scan through, listen to different parts. And some parts obviously sound darker or more mysterious than others. But let's say you want to control some of the bass frequencies that might be in this mix. I can use something like a low shelf, and using Pro Q4 I can also go into spectral mode, which responds to the resonant peaks in the signal and pulls them down dynamically. So as we play through this heavy bass part, it's really responding to the music, and I can customize the threshold so that at very quiet points in the soundscape, it doesn't necessarily do this as much. And using the spectral density knob, I tend to find when I turn all the way up, it's even more transparent and natural sounding. So it really responds to the music no matter where you are at in the soundscape. And you can do a similar thing with the mid-range frequencies, processing the signal, and then you can do a lot of creative things with it too. Here I have the classic Valhalla Shimmer, which is so well known in the ambient soundscape community because it has a really nice sound, and it technically just adds an upper octave delay to what's going on, or an upper octave reverb to what's going on in the original signal. So if I play the soundscape right here, hit stop, you can hear the decay of Valhalla Shimmer. And you can run this in serial. If you turn the mix all the way up, it's going to push everything back sonically even more, which can sound really cool. And this plugin also has some really cool features, like the reverb mode can go into big stereo, which can increase sort of the spatial dimension of the soundscape. If you're wearing headphones, you'll probably hear the difference here. But yeah, you don't necessarily need a third-party plugin to do any of this stuff. You could do everything I did with the EQ, with EQ8 in Ableton. And if you're using the standard reverb from Ableton, you can also make it a much more shimmery, interesting reverb sound. The hybrid reverb that comes with Ableton Suite literally has an algorithm called Shimmer, which is gonna basically give you a similar sound. And you could even take just the regular reverb if you don't have Ableton Live Suite, if you have standard or intro, and just turn your decay way up and maybe turn up the diffusion as well. And that's gonna create a very ambient sounding reverb, especially when you go past something like 6 or 7 seconds, going up even into the double-digit range. It'll just push the mix and blur things and make it really interesting sounding. I also did a previous video where I talked about Spectral Blur, which is a really cool Ableton Suite plugin that comes with Ableton Suite. And this thing as well does a lot of really unique things to soundscapes. So if I go ahead and turn off these other plugins and we listen to the soundscape as is, Spectral Blur is going to really freeze things out and kind of add sort of a sort of ambient reverb style effect as well. So everything's kind of smoothed out, and you can even turn up the wet gain, which is a really useful feature. It kind of adds even more reverb to the signal. It's going to get louder. And as I hit stop, you can hear the decay that this thing's providing. So this is another really cool plugin. I did a video previously about the spectral things. We even made playable ambient textures so you could actually create custom soundscapes from what you play on the keyboard using some kind of previous audio material. Really cool technique. I'll link that video down below. But yeah, a lot of people never even knew that PaulXStretch is a totally free and standalone app. You don't even need a DAW to use it. And of course, you can have fun with other plugins afterwards from the DAW stock or third party and create custom sounds. So if you ever wondered, where do these videos come from? How can you create these sounds? It doesn't even matter what DAW you have. Yes, the function in FL Studio works, but PaulXStretch is a free plugin. It's amazing and really fun to use. So I hope this inspired you. And yeah, feel free to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't liked and subscribed already. We do a lot of music production topics on this channel, a lot of fun sound design stuff. There's also a link down below to my Patreon where I've created MIDI, presets, synthesizer patches, just about everything, and long form tutorials like this one that you can only find on there. So feel free to check it out. I'll see you all in the next video and have fun.